Колеги, дякую всім, хто прийшов, дякую всім, хто дивиться нас онлайн. Будемо продовжувати робочий день в Українському кризовому медіа-центрі. І наступний брифінг у нас на тему створення фотопроекту про українських військових. Нашим спікером є Марк Невіл, британський фотограф та документаліст. So Mark, the floor is yours. Just turn on the microphone.
Yeah, is that on? Great. I'd like to start by saying a big thank you to the Ukrainian Crisis Media Centre for having me today, and a big thank you to Margot Gontar from stopfake.org for organising this and putting it together. You might be thinking, what is a British artist doing in Ukraine? Well, basically, I was a war artist in Helmand, Afghanistan, and I lived with the British Army there during 2011-2012, and the whole experience had a huge impact on me. So I came back with something called post-traumatic stress disorder from that experience, and I decided to make work about it. What I didn't realise was that it was such a taboo in the UK to talk about mental health issues, especially pertaining to the military. So I made this book called Battle Against Stigma, and it contains my own story about post-traumatic stress disorder and the impact going to war had on me, and how difficult it was to adjust to civilian life when I came back. So the first book is my photographs, which I took in Helmand, Afghanistan, accompanied by my own story. And the second book is the stories from other troops who I was living with, working with, who used to think that post-traumatic stress disorder and adjustment disorder was bullshit, and then it happened to them, and now they think it's the case. So I send this book out free to prisons, homeless centres, mental health charities, everywhere where people, soldiers, veterans who might have been suffering from PTSD but never got treated, might have ended up, because as we all know, with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, quite often people end up drinking too much, or they become violent, or they lose their jobs. So it's really trying to reach the people who hadn't received help, who hadn't received treatment for their adjustment disorder. And but it's such a taboo subject in the UK that 500 copies of the book were seized by the Home Office, by UK Border Force. Luckily, another 1,000 copies of my book came via a different route, and I spent a lot of last year sending them out to charities and trying to get them to people, to encourage them to come forward and get help. Anyway, via a circuitous route, an organisation in Ukraine found out about this book and offered to have the book translated into Ukrainian, and it's going to be disseminated to military clinics throughout the Ukraine. And on top of that, I'm doing another project, which is I'm actually making a totally Ukrainian version of this book, which means I'll be taking photographs of the military, of the medical battalions. I was in Kiev Military Hospital a couple of weeks taking photographs, and also recording the stories of internally displaced peoples in Ukraine. So this project will last about a year to 2 years, and the end result will be a substantial photo book like this. And we're going to start sending them out to people, especially in the media, to try and give them an accurate picture of what's really happening in Ukraine, because I don't think that we get a very accurate picture in the UK about what's really happening with the war. Certainly the war in Afghanistan that Britain was involved in was not accurately reported in the British media. And I know, because I was there, and this huge gap between what really happens and what the media tells us is very disturbing everywhere. Not just in Ukraine or Russia, it's very disturbing in Britain. And this is something that Margot Gontar and I have talked about quite a lot, this gap between what really happens and what we're told, and it's not acceptable. So I'd like to try and play a film if I can. But just to give you an example of what it was like when I was in Helmand, I had to wear, these are my anti-ballistic underwear, and they have Kevlar in them, this heavy metal, which means that if you step on a mine, on a landmine, you probably lose your legs, but you keep your testicles. So they're very, very popular, these, but very hot, very sweaty. And the other thing in Helmand is, where do you go to the toilet? You know, you can't just pop into a shop. So they have these things called wag bags, and basically you open a cubicle, and you've got a little hole. You take this out like this, put this into the hole, do your thing, and then you seal it up like this. And you come out of the toilet and you throw it into this big pit full of other bags. And once a week they put gasoline on it and set fire to it. And then all you can hear all day is the sound of exploding shit. It's very strange. So all these details about going to war and the effect they have on you last. And as I understand it, any country at war, it has a huge psychological effect on the whole population, on the whole country, not just the people at the front line. And that's something that I want to look at with this project in Ukraine. The other thing I want to try and do here is set up a printing press in either Lviv or Kiev that will make photo books like this, which tell the stories of internally displaced people. Now, I'm not sure how many internally displaced people there are at the moment in Ukraine, but I think 1.5 million would not be an exaggeration. A huge amount of people, and really those stories aren't really covered in the West, not as they should be. This particular film was shot from a tank in Helmand, Afghanistan, and this is a market which used to be run by the Taliban, and since British forces were there, it's now considered safe. So here, I'm in a tank, and I'm visible from here upwards, and there's a guy with a machine gun at the front, and I'm next to him with my camera. And you start to see the reactions of the locals. And see, this guy's really pissed off. So people, I don't know, revealed themselves to me in this film, and I felt ashamed to be there as part of an occupying force in a different country. And this deeply ambiguous relationship between us as the occupying force, the British in Afghanistan, I mean, and the local population is seen through people's reactions here. This is the shadow of the machine gun that you can see coming up occasionally. And I don't know, of all the time I spent in Afghanistan, I felt the most ashamed when we were driving through this market. And I felt how inappropriate our presence was there. And I guess it motivated me to want to try and make work here in Ukraine and use my work in some beneficial way to talk about what's really going on. I've probably talked for about 10 minutes now, I would say.
Still 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Left.
Okay. I've already been to Kiev Military Hospital, I've been to orphanages, I've been to family homes, I've been to rehabilitation centres. Soon, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to Artemisc. I've been absolutely moved and blown away by the number of volunteers there are in Ukraine. It seems everywhere I go, people are giving their time, their resources to try and help the troops on the front line in some real substantial way. And that's really remarkable. And hopefully my books will try and tell those stories as well. For now, the project has just started, so I can't talk with any authority about the situation in Ukraine. What I can tell you that when I was in Helmand, Afghanistan, we were sold the war as being a positive thing, but in fact, of course, it wasn't. And it was only if someone was killed that it made the news. So on the 6 o'clock news, if a soldier died, you'd hear about it. But people were losing legs and arms every day. And I would see this happening, or I'd hear it. You'd hear the explosion, and someone would get on the radio, and someone's been blinded, or someone else has lost their legs. And somehow those people never made the news because they were kept alive by brilliant surgeons. So it was one way in which the British media helped sell the war to the British people. So I'm very aware these days of how powerful propaganda is. And hopefully this project will attempt to fight against that propaganda machine from whichever country. As I say, when the books are finished, they'll be disseminated for free, and hopefully it'll have a positive impact. Thank you for listening. If there's any questions.
Mark, thank you a lot. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or clarifications? If there, please. Yeah.
I'll ask one. Is it the only project you are going to make in Ukraine, or are there other you are thinking about?
Well, funnily enough, I was thinking of collaborating with Stop Fake on a project about this very thing, this gap between stories we read in the British press and the reality. So Stop Fake and I were talking about this collaboration whereby I would make pictures which seemed ambiguous, because as we all know, photographs can tell a lie as well. So photographs can appear to be saying one thing when in fact something else is happening. So we were going to take half a dozen stories from, for example, stories perpetrated by the Russian press about Ukraine somehow dehumanizing the Ukrainian people in some way, and matching them with photographs that I would take in order to expose this kind of systematic lying that's going on. And what's shocking for me is that a lot of these stories actually reach the British press as well. So in well-respected newspapers like The Guardian, on BBC as well, I don't feel like we're getting a particularly accurate picture. I must say as well, I'm not a journalist. So I've worked as an artist all my life. I've made films and photographs, and normally what I do ends up in galleries and museums. So, for example, I have an exhibition opening in Cologne in Germany next month. The only time I've ever worked for a newspaper was I made a project called Here is London, about wealth inequality in London, about how many rich people there are and as opposed to how many poor people. And that was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in 2012. So I always end up making work, very long projects, very immersive projects, which might last 2 or 3 years, and these end up hopefully benefiting someone in some way. And then eventually they end up in an art gallery sometimes. But I'm not a conventional journalist. I don't work for a newspaper or a media outlet, so I have no particular agenda to tell other than my own, hopefully.
We're going to finish the press conference at this point. Thank you, Mark, for coming, and good luck with the project. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you here at Ukraine Crisis Media Center in the closest future. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentin.
Колеги, ми на цьому закінчимо прес-конференцію.